Nick Skrip, the content lead for Fantrax. He's been doing all these graphics, content of his own. And Nick, it's been a crazy week of NFL free agency. I'm a Philadelphia Eagles fan. You're a Chicago Bears fan, but both of us are just general NFL fans. Are you as happy as I am about how things went down this week?
Absolutely. And I think if I mentioned this before, if you are a content creator, you should just be extremely ecstatic at this point because we have too much to talk about. It's hard to keep up with, putting out takes and graphics and short videos and things like that. I know a lot of people are busy this time of year, but as content creators, as NFL fans, as fantasy football managers, all three of those categories, this has been great. I can't remember the last free agency where I felt like we had so many different, very, very impactful moves. And it just makes for an exciting upcoming season in both just real life football and fantasy football. So loving it right now.
Yeah, I remember a couple years back, I think it was 2022 maybe, Devontae Adams got traded this time of year. Tyreek Hill got traded. That was crazy, but I don't remember really any other moves that went on in that time, especially with a draft class coming up as exciting as this one. Obviously, plenty went on in the NFL this week with free agency, but we want to focus on the most impactful fantasy football moves. So we're going to do an award show here today. Obviously, tons of players got moved, new contracts, some with different teams, some with the same teams, but we're going to put an emphasis on some players that we think fit the mold for each award. We'll each give our own answers. Some are going to be the same, some are going to be different. So let's just dive right into it here. And we'll start with the most improved NFL team for from a fantasy football perspective. And I'll kick it over to you to start this one. Who do you got for this award? Most improved team for fantasy football?
I'll start off with the Pittsburgh Steelers because I feel like we've always looked at their team and thought, hey, they have some juicy fantasy football options, but the quarterback play was very subpar. And now enters Russell Wilson, 4 seasons over 4,000 yards, 5 seasons over 30 touchdowns, 6 seasons over 400 rushing yards. And it's a big ups for guys there. We look at George Pickens. He's ranked number 10 in deep targets in 2023, number 7 in deep targets in 2022. And you tie that to Russell Wilson, who is ranked number 9 in deep ball attempts in 2023, number 1 in 2022, and number 5 in 2021. So you got a guy who actually will push the ball downfield and is actually competent at the quarterback position with a guy that likes to go downfield. I like the impact on Pat Freiermuth, who I think is a true sleeper when it comes to who won, via these transactions. Freiermuth, 98 targets, 63 catches, 732 receiving yards back in 2022, 7 touchdowns as a rookie. Najee Harris even is a guy that I still kind of like more than consensus, especially seeing how he actually was fairly good week 7 through 18 this past season. So I think the Steelers, obviously, the offensive line has been a big issue, a glaring issue for them, but also has been the quarterback, right? So I think Russell Wilson's a guy that comes in, good veteran, a guy that's had history of success and history of supporting people, and we have to be excited for these pieces. We obviously know Deontay Johnson's gone, but George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth, and the running game.
Yeah, it seems like the Steelers do a great job, too, of really evaluating the wide receiver position. We're talking about Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, Juju Smith-Schuster was, phenomenal when he was there early on with Antonio Brown. They always seem to nail it in the draft. So I do expect them to add another wide receiver. I don't think they're done yet. Obviously, removing Allen Robinson from the mix there, Deontay Johnson trade to Carolina. I always thought that Russell Wilson, he said he wants to win 2 Super Bowls next 5 seasons. If you're going to join any team, I thought it'd be in the NFC. I thought for sure, rather than compete with Mahomes, Burrow, Herbert, Lamar, Stroud now, why not go to the NFC? A little bit easier path to those 2 Super Bowls. But yet here we are. Fantastic defense. Obviously, former defensive player TJ Watt. I don't think they're done adding there too, but they already have some pieces in play for that offense. So I do think the Steelers are going to be a hot commodity, and I do think you're going to kind of get them cheap because of people's recency bias on Russell Wilson, because of people's recency bias on Arthur Smith. So definitely a team I'm looking to target in 2024 on the cheap. But my most improved team for fantasy football is the Atlanta Falcons. And it's very easy to say because of, ironically, the removal of Arthur Smith, as head coach from last year. But it's the addition of Kirk Cousins. And it's definitely a risk. I'm not going to say that Kirk Cousins doesn't come with some risk, but this guy tore his Achilles last year and was just given $100 million guaranteed. But that's the kind of risk you have to take when you haven't been in the playoffs for the last 6 seasons. the Atlanta Falcons have. But, it's the beneficiaries that we want from this offense. I do think Kirk Cousins, who's never averaged 20 points per game in fantasy football before in his career, can finally take that next step and get there with Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, very good receiving back. Drake London has been the wide receiver 31 and 37 in his first 2 seasons. Kyle Pitts, tight end 6 in his first season, but then tight end 33, tight end 13. Bijan Robinson, RB9, should have been and was drafted much higher than RB9 last year. I think all of these guys get a boost. Drake London should be a top 24 guy easily, wide receiver 2, most likely a wide receiver 1 or pushing for that. I think Kyle Pitts finally finishes inside the top 12. And I think Bijan Robinson will be a top 5 guy. That's just kind of the impact that Kirk Cousins has. This offense scored 18.9 points per game last year. That was 26th in the league. Kirk Cousins has thrown for 4,000 yards in 7 of 8 seasons prior to last year. And then the big kicker here is the coaching staff. I mentioned before, no more Arthur Smith. They got Zach Robinson as their offensive coordinator from the Rams. Same team, same coaching tree as Kevin O'Connell, who worked with Kirk Cousins for the past couple of years in Minnesota. So I think it's going to be a pass-heavy team. I think everyone that I named is going to benefit. They did bring in Darnell Mooney. They traded for Rondell Moore. I just think this team is going to be oozing with fantasy value. It's going to be interesting to see the ADP, though. Do people agree with me at their ceiling, and are they pricing these guys there? Yet to be seen, but definitely going to be targeting a lot of these guys.
And, what's interesting about Kirk Cousins is obviously he's coming off of the Achilles injury, but he's not a mobile guy. So it's not like we're banking on him trying to get back to running the football. Last season, weeks 1 through 8, the games he actually appeared in, he ranked during that time 6th in total fantasy points. He was tied for 1st in passing touchdowns with 18, and he was 2nd in passing yards. He was absolutely balling out last season prior to the injury. And now you look at a guy like Drake London, who you've mentioned plenty here, but I like a lot, and he's been the biggest riser in my dynasty rankings because last season, when targeted 8+ times, here's some of his fantasy scores: 18.7, 14.7, 21.5, 29.2. So it's like you give a talented guy target volume and he produces well in real life and in fantasy football. And I think that's what we're finally going to see. The issue in Atlanta was not talent. It was being utilized the correct way. And when you have a quarterback that has a history of volume through the air, and now you attach that to playmakers in Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts and Drake London, it's going to scream fantasy football relevance and these guys rising, and you have to be excited for it.
Yeah, I equate Drake London, last thing on him, to, I don't think people were going to be paying what they did for Michael Pittman last year. He was kind of cheap and exceeded expectations, wide receiver 13 on a points per game basis. Unfortunately, I don't think you're going to be able to get Drake London as cheap as you did Pittman last year, but could finish very similarly with the quarterback change there. Let's move on to our second award here on the Fantrax Free Agency Fantasy Awards here. And I have the most impactful running back edition. And this was tough because there were so many different running back moves to look at here. We have plenty of other awards to get to. We'll talk about plenty of these guys. But I think the most impactful for me for fantasy football, and again, really tough here, but I'm going to go with Josh Jacobs. And that's because I think a lot of people were down on Josh Jacobs and the Las Vegas Raiders last year and really feeling good about the Green Bay Packers. Obviously, they marched into Dallas last year and beat them in the playoffs. I saw Aaron Jones leaving free agency, and now they bring in former rushing leader Josh Jacobs from 2 seasons ago. He's averaged 20.5 touches per game, 262 plus touches per season, and he's averaging 300 touches per season in his career. Now he's going to be replacing Aaron Jones, albeit A.J. Dillon sounds like he's going to be back with the team. I don't think they want to give A.J. Dillon the ball. I think they only give A.J. Dillon the ball out of necessity when Aaron Jones either A, needs a breather, or B, is injured, which we've seen as he's gotten up there in age. Aaron Jones last year in just 11 games, 34 red zone rush attempts. A.J. Dillon, 34 red zone rush attempts. So you figure Josh Jacobs is going to take all of Aaron Jones's red zone rush attempts on an ascending offense. And I think he'll even take away some from A.J. Dillon too. Josh Jacobs himself had 36 on a very poorly run, poorly managed Las Vegas Raiders offense. The Packers were 17th in red zone scoring. They only scored 53% of the time when they got in the red zone. So I think a guy like Josh Jacobs coming into the mix when they get in a scoring position is going to have a major impact, is probably going to score double-digit rushing touchdowns. And I think all of a sudden he's going to vault up fantasy rankings and be a very popular ad for a lot of people.
Yeah, I love this signing. I think that it truly makes Jacobs a big riser because you're looking at two very different situations. You're looking at two different O-lines, looking at two different offenses. I think that this low key helps Jordan Love. You look at Green Bay last season; they ranked 15th in total rushing yards, so they're like middle of the NFL when it comes to rushing. Obviously, more through the air. Now I feel like they could be much more of a balanced team. You know, Aaron Jones obviously had a series of injuries last year. He was hot to end the season, but now you have a guy that, like you said, led the league in rushing, a guy that could probably score now in the red zone, a guy that, again, balances the offense. You know, Jacobs has had 2 seasons over 50 receptions. That gives them the same sort of thing, kind of, I guess, that Aaron Jones has brought, but he has that in his skill set. And I think when we're looking at, again, risers in fantasy football, Josh Jacobs has to be one. I think for a lot of rankings, he was outside the top 12 in Dynasty. He was one of my biggest risers. I did my Dynasty rankings today for me personally at the running back position, because you factor in pretty good guy that's a workhorse. Now he's in a much better situation. Then you look at Green Bay, and this sucks to say as a Chicago fan, but now they get even better with this Josh Jacobs signing.
Yeah, Brandon Blanco of Fantrax as well says Josh Jacobs will be a top 5 running back with the Packers. That's yet to be seen, but I do think that is a ceiling, and you're not going to pay a top 5 price for him. I do think if you go wide receiver heavy early on in your redraft drafts this summer, you can get Josh Jacobs as your RB1, possibly in the 3rd round, which is a great spot to land him. Who is your most impactful running back addition for our fantasy awards here for free agency?
I'm going to say Derrick Henry with the Ravens.
Yeah, I was between him too.
And I would have said Josh Jacobs if you didn't take first dibs on it. So I think we're on the same page here. But Baltimore led the NFL in team rushing attempts last season and total rushing yards, 262 more rushing yards as a team than any other NFL team. The Lamar Jackson, Gus Edwards, Keaton Mitchell, Justice Hill combination made that up. Let's take Lamar Jackson out of this. So you have Edwards, Mitchell, and Hill. None of those guys are in the same stratosphere as Derrick Henry and what he's done as a runner and his impact as a running back in the league. So now you have a very run-emphasized offense, adding arguably the best runner for the last, 5 years now. You got Derrick Henry, who's done nothing but rack up the yardage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seasons in a row with double-digit touchdowns. So he's going to bring that. And I like what he brings not only to the Ravens and not what he's a monster at in the red zone, but what he's going to bring to Lamar Jackson. I don't think that's been talked about enough. When you have the Ravens now in the red zone, I think we knew Gus Edwards can score, but a lot of focus, a lot of eyes are on Lamar Jackson. Them both in the red zone is going to be a problem. I think the run play action, is going to be a big problem. When you have Derrick Henry in the backfield versus any of those guys I listed before, I think there's a lot of focus on, him running the ball, where now if they do fake the handoff to Derrick Henry, I think Lamar Jackson is going to be even more efficient as a passer. I think Lamar Jackson can have even more bigger running plays because of the focus of what Derrick Henry can do. So a lot of impacts, obviously, for fantasy football. I think he's a guy a lot of people are going to be excited for in redraft. I can see a lot of people reaching on Derrick Henry knowing, hey, Gus Edwards just had a pretty decent season. Gus Edwards just scored a bunch of touchdowns. Keaton Mitchell looked pretty good for, his window of time. Now we got Derrick Henry in Baltimore. So huge impacts for him and what he can bring to the Ravens and what he's going to do for Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, I think a lot of people incorrectly, a lot of the times when they see, the crowded backfields or all these playmakers on a specific offense, think, oh, they're going to all cancel each other out. I don't really think that's the case here. In fact, 2019, when Lamar Jackson won his first MVP award, Mark Ingram rushed for over 1,000 yards. I think it's very possible both these guys can have success. And regardless, Lamar Jackson runs more than your favorite quarterback probably in the NFL. So you're not going to shy away from him because he's still going to get his in the rushing game. It's also interesting to me, too, and I've got more to say on Derrick Henry in a little bit. I gave him a different award, but everyone for years now, I feel like, has been predicting that he's going to finally fall off a cliff. Landing spot matters. Now he's in Baltimore, and everyone's back in on Derrick Henry. It's great to see. I will move on here to our next award here for free agency for fantasy football purposes. I didn't know what to name this award. I thought maybe, the real G's move in silence like lasagna award, but we're just going to keep it simple. We'll go here with just don't sleep on this move award. And it's a player that I think people are going to overlook that maybe they shouldn't be. I'll kick it over to you for this one first. Who do you got for this?
I want to plug Deontay Johnson. I really, really like this move. I was like tweeting out, hey, Carolina's got to do something for the wide receiver room, and they went and did something. Bryce Young was not good as a rookie. We know this, and I'm not scapegoating things, but when Adam Thielen rises from the grave and he's your wide receiver one, and he's the impact on Bryce Young and who he has to hyper target. I think that was an issue, especially seeing that Adam Thielen declined last season. He wasn't great from start to finish. And then DJ Shark, a role player last year. Jonathan Mingo, I thought was not good because he had plenty of opportunities to be good. The offensive line was very, very bad. How do you help Bryce Young develop? You give him a guy that is very good at two things: route running and just in general getting open. And we have smart guys in the industry that have painted that picture. Matt Harmon dropped some data showing how Deontay Johnson from 2019 through 2022 ranked very well, in his success rate, 75+% in his success rate versus man, 82+% rate in his success rate versus zone, and then 75% plus in his success rate versus press. So very, very successful in those metrics. Scott Barrett dropped ESPN's open score numbers. So this is showing how wide receivers do as far as against each other in getting open. Very simply, 2023, Deontay Johnson, his open score 12th best, 2022 the best, 2021 fourth best, 2020 third best, 2019 second best. 2020 through 2022, we've seen him have elite target numbers: 144, 169, 147. He had the 1161 receiving yard season in 2021. He was 8th in points per game for fantasy that season as well. So Deontay Johnson has just been a guy that's a very good route runner, very good at getting open, earns targets, and that's exactly what Bryce Young needed. So he gets his wide receiver one. That helps his development. But Deontay Johnson simply is going to be a guy that is going to have a massive target share. And I think, after a poor season, people are going to sleep on him. But I love this move. I know some people will be like, well, Bryce Young, I'm not sure about him. Maybe Russell Wilson would have been better. I don't know, man. I think this Carolina move is kind of slept on. And I'm truly excited to see Deontay Johnson in a Panthers uniform.
Yeah, I have to agree. Deontay Johnson's been one of my favorite fantasy targets for years now because of the volume. Volume is king, especially in a PPR league. I know he doesn't score all the touchdowns. 2 years ago, he didn't score a single touchdown. But, I'm not chasing guys that are scoring touchdowns. I want them getting opportunities in hopes that they do score touchdowns. And I think that's what he'll have in Carolina. As of right now, his biggest competition for targets is going to be Adam Thielen, who's going to be 34 years old. I think this was a great move for Bryce Young. I think bringing in Dave Canales, the head coach, is a great move for Bryce Young. He has his fingerprints all over the resurgence of Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield last year in Tampa Bay. They built up that offensive line. So when in doubt, I do think he's going to be looking for Deontay. Hopefully he stays healthy. He had a hamstring injury last year, and that's probably why he was only the 12th best in separation. But I think Deontay Johnson is actually going to be better for fantasy in a place like Carolina than he would have been in Pittsburgh. I don't think Russell Wilson does a great job of getting the ball into the middle of the field, crossing routes and such. I think he's more of that deep ball guy. So I like to see Deontay Johnson in a different spot. I think people are going to be sleeping on him. And again, Adam Thielen last year, people were so skeptical of Bryce Young and that offense. He was basically free in drafts. I think he was wide receiver 50. No one was drafting Adam Thielen in redraft. So Deontay Johnson probably won't get that treatment, but you're going to get him in the double-digit rounds. I guarantee it. The guy I have for this award here, the don't sleep on this move, is Joe Mixon, which I don't think many people are sleeping on the fact that Joe Mixon is joining an ascending Houston Texans offense. But I think when drafts come around, I don't think people are going to be drafting Joe Mixon as a 10, maybe even a top 15 running back. It's yet to be seen. I think there's a lot of other names people are going to be looking at. And I think Joe Mixon is going to be a great, possibly an RB1 for your fantasy team if you go wide receiver heavy early. This is a team that traded for Joe Mixon. They didn't even want him to hit the market. They made an emphasis to get him in the trade. And then when he got there, they ripped up his deal and gave him a new 3-year deal worth $27 million, $13 million in guarantees. Now, if you consider how the franchise tag works, the tag this year was somewhere between $11 and $12 million for 1 year. Consider they're giving Joe Mixon $13 million for this year. It's possible he only plays 1 year in Houston. I don't think that's truly the case, but he does have just under 2,000 touches. Joe Mixon himself hasn't been fantastic, even on a prolific Bengals offense. But I do think on this team, behind a hopefully healthier offensive line this year, with Laramie Tunsil, leading the way, Cushenberry they got in free agency, one of the best centers on the market. I do think Joe Mixon can have success on, again, an ascending offense that is retaining their offensive coordinator from last year, Bobby Slowick, who was a hot name in the head coaching cycle. So I really like Joe Mixon for fantasy football. I know that Devin Singletary wasn't really a top target for people last year. Joe Mixon's a little bit of a bigger name, but I think a lot of people are going to be focusing on this passing game. But I think when push comes to shove, Joe Mixon is going to punch in double-digit touchdowns. I think he's going to have a great year. I think he could finish inside the top 12. Maybe not top 8, top 10, but I think he's going to flirt with RB1 numbers. Not to mention, too, he doesn't have much competition in that backfield. Devin Singletary's leaving behind 216 carries. That's 57% of last year's running back carries there. Dameon Pierce had 145 carries, but averaged 2.9 yards per carry. I think the jury is still out, I should say, on Dameon Pierce. I don't think he's, cooked. I don't think his career is over, but I think they brought in Joe Mixon knowing that Dameon Pierce is not a guy they can trust with such high aspirations they have for this team.
Yeah, I mean, this is a team that went 10-7 last year, had a playoff run, looked good. What was missing, though, they were 7th in passing yards. They were bottom 12 in rushing yards. So it reminds me of what I said about the Packers, is that now it feels like more of a balanced offense. You were really good at one aspect, and now you almost balance it out by adding something else, and that something else is Joe Mixon, who's a true playmaker. Over 1,000 rushing yards in 2 out of 3 of his last seasons, back-to-back seasons, over 50 receptions, double-digit touchdowns in 2 out of 3 of his last seasons. So we saw very good games out of Devin Singletary last year after he won the job. Joe Mixon's a better player. Joe Mixon's a more complete player than Devin Singletary. Joe Mixon will 100% be locked into my top 12 for redraft rankings. It's such a good offense. He's shown to be that. He's shown to be very fantasy successful. And I think Houston made a great move. I think Houston is going to be scary next season. You look at some of the signings they've had beyond Joe Mixon, and I think that this team is just really, really building, and they're doing a very good job of doing that. I think this helps CJ Stroud. He's a good pass catching running back. Again, I think he'll help keep defenses honest, which again will help CJ Stroud in itself. But love this move. I love the fantasy impact and the fact that he not only is in Houston, but they gave him that money deal that you just talked about. Says a lot about how they view Joe Mixon. And Dameon Pierce, handcuffed, but I think it's kind of enough said about his future when it comes to Dynasty. I don't think I'll have him very high at all in Dynasty. I think the hope of, well, one day, he could be the guy, and Joe Mixon's not a young running back, so maybe it's him one day. You got beat out by Devin Singletary because he was a lot better than you last year. And now Joe Mixon's even better than Devin Singletary. So handcuff for fantasy football, sure, but I think this is one of those enough said sort of things.
Yeah, it's funny. I think a lot last year when they brought in Devin Singletary, a lot of people thought like, oh man, Devin Singletary, he barely did anything in Buffalo. This is Dameon Pierce's backfield. Complete opposite. And now it's Joe Mixon's backfield. It just shows how quickly things can change, especially for Dynasty Fantasy Football season, for Dynasty Fantasy Football leagues, I should say. I will move on here to our next award. And this is a quote from the great Frank Sinatra. I'll get it up here in a second. It is the Best Revenge is Massive Success Award. And ironically, my pick for this award, New York, New York, Frank Sinatra, is Saquon Barkley leaving New York and heading to my Philadelphia Eagles. I say this with a smile on my face. Saquon Barkley is one of my favorite players. I just can't believe I felt the same way about A.J. Brown. I remember sitting there on draft night and saying to my dad, I just want Howie Roseman to make a big move. And he went out, traded for A.J. Brown, thought we stole him from the Tennessee Titans. That is yet to, it's obviously proven itself. But Saquon Barkley doesn't really feel like a steal because we gave him a ton of money, ton of guarantees, $24 million. But I think he is the missing piece to this offense. They haven't had a ton of 1,000-yard rushing running backs. They've had 2 in the last 2 seasons, Miles Sanders and DeAndre Swift. But prior to that, Miles Sanders had not even eclipsed 900 rushing yards. So I like to keep this rolling. I don't want to see Jalen Hurts run as much. I don't think this hurts Jalen Hurts. I think just kind of just balances it out between the two. But let's talk about Saquon Barkley for a second. He's had an injury-riddled career, and he's also played on the New York Giants, who have not been very good as of late. From 2018 to 2023, RB1, RB10. He was RB1 as a rookie. RB1, RB10, RB114. He tore his ACL week 2. RB30 in a year after, recovering from ACL and hurt his ankle that year. RB5 in 2022 and RB13 last year. And we know how bad the New York Giants were last year, and he was still RB13 on a points per game basis. Now, a lot of people say, the tush push stole so many touchdowns from DeAndre Swift. Saquon Barkley is going to suffer. I don't think that's the case. I don't think he really needs to score a ton of touchdowns to have a fantasy football impact. But here are his touchdowns year by year as well. Rookie season when he was the RB1, he scored 15. He was phenomenal. 8, when he tore his ACL, he obviously didn't score any that year. 4, when he was RB30. And then the last 2 years, RB5, RB13, 10, and 10. I think he's going to score around 10 this year. There's so many mouths to feed on the Eagles offense, but I think they're going to be one of the best offenses in the league. Saquon's going to get his. DeAndre Swift had 6 touchdowns last year. Jalen Hurts had 15. Jalen Hurts scored 15 of their 22 rushing touchdowns last year. That's 68%. If you add Swift's to that, his 5, that's 20 of 22. That's 90% of the rushing touchdowns were Jalen Hurts, DeAndre Swift. Swift is now gone, and Jalen Hurts, I don't think he's going to rush for 15 next year. I think that number comes down. Saquon Barkley, I think, flirts with 10, 12, maybe more. Yet to be seen, obviously. But he's had a career-high 352 touches twice in his career. In the seasons where he didn't tear his ACL and wasn't recovering from his ACL, he averages 315 touches per year. I expect 270 to 300 touches for Saquon. He has 41 receptions in every season but one. I think he'll have about that on this Philadelphia Eagles offense. And obviously when they play the New York Giants twice next season, he's going to go, crazy for those games. So Saquon Barkley, to me, I think is a huge riser for the 2024 season and beyond. He went from one of the worst offenses in the NFL to one of the best. He's going to have a massive role, a lack of competition back there, other than Jalen Hurts, who, again, in Kellen Moore's offense, I don't think they want him to run the ball. I think they want to establish the run to establish the pass. So I think Jalen Hurts' passing numbers go up, and I think Saquon Barkley is going to go absolutely crazy in 2024.
I agree. I could see him finishing as the running back 1 in fantasy football next season. I feel like sometimes I'm a year too early, and I ranked him this past year as my running back 2. And now I'm thinking like that just seems perfect to me right now. He's still, in my opinion, one of the best talents when healthy on the football field. When you're looking at everything you want in a running back when it comes to being a pass catcher, a guy that can make plays happen that should have been only a 3-yard play and it turns into a 20-yard gain. Just a great rusher, the elite build that he has. He has everything you're looking for. Now you go from the Giants situation to the Eagles situation, and everything we've seen the past 2 years out of like the flashes of DeAndre Swift, the flashes of Miles Sanders. Saquon Barkley is a much, much different running back than both of those guys. So very excited for him. I think he's going to have a massive impact on fantasy football. I want to say the tush push conversation needs to stop across like everything, because people say all the time, if the tush push gets eliminated, Jalen Hurts is just not good at football and not good at fantasy football. Because it's a thing, there's going to be no success for the running back. Like, we're talking about professional organizations who spend every minute of every day almost figuring out how to be successful. So that means winning football games and scoring touchdowns and producing statistics. So I think the tush push is the most overrated thing to talk about in all of football. Barkley, I want to make another side note with him. I put out a video about him clapping back at Tiki Barber because Tiki Barber was saying how, he's dead to me. And there's a lot of fans out there. What a scummy move to go from the Giants to a rival in the Eagles. If you worked at any company in the real world, let's say you worked for Pepsi, right? And let's say Coke came to you in the real world and said, hey, we have such a better situation over here. We're going to pay you more money. We're going to set you up to be much more successful. Nobody would ever, ever, ever knock somebody from moving from Pepsi to Coke because it was a competitor, because of those things. The NFL is a business at the end of the day. And Saquon Barkley made a business move by going from the Giants to the Eagles, a much better situation. He's set up for more success. He's going to get some money, right? So I applaud him for it. And I think it's silly, the Giants fans out there that are throwing all of this shade on Saquon for being an Eagle when it makes no sense, especially when you relate it to the real world, which this is the real world for him. So I wanted to make that side note there.
I remember when Terrell Owens was here, obviously we went to the Super Bowl in Philadelphia and he played on a broken leg and he was awesome. And then he went to the Dallas Cowboys and I was heartbroken. I was actually pissed, but he wasn't even drafted here and I was that angry. I totally understand where New York Giants fans are coming from, but you got to blame your front office. They didn't make him an offer last year. And they didn't make him an offer this year. They let him test the market and how he put them to the test. And, he made him an offer he couldn't refuse. It's what Howie Roseman does. And, I totally understand being upset, being angry, but don't direct it at Saquon. His family would have been more mad at him if he didn't take the deal that he got with the Philadelphia Eagles. And that's what's more important here for these guys, especially last year. Everyone was pounding the table. Running backs are getting screwed. They need to get paid. He just got paid. What are we doing? Exactly. It's not Saquon's fault. Blame the Giants front office. Who do you got? Best revenge is a mess. I could go on for hours with Saquon, but go ahead.
I have some homerism here. I have some fandom here because I'm a huge DeAndre Swift fan. I'm a huge Bears fan, but it's got to be him. He's going back to the NFC North. He's going to play the Lions, who gave up on him. He's going to play them twice a year, and I think that's going to be bittersweet for him. I think he's going to love that, DeAndre Swift. I've always believed in the talent. I've always believed in what he can do if given the volume and healthy. Healthy's been an asterisk at times for him, but he's joining Chicago after having a career high, or finishing with a career high 1,049 rushing yards in Philadelphia. He's finished 3 seasons with 46, 62, and 48 receptions. Those are true dual threat running back numbers. Fantasy football is opening 3 seasons in points per game, running back 15, running back 8, and running back 15. I love it for fantasy football because I think, you look at the running back room. I'm a Bears fan, and I look at fantasy stuff all the time. I've never been a Khalil Herbert guy. I think he's a typical running back 2 that has stepped up when given, the volume and when he's needed to. He's not a workhorse guy. I think he's a good complement. I think Roschon Johnson is interesting. I think that he's a good complement as well. I'm not sure he's the workhorse. DeAndre Swift comes in, and I think he just brings a lot to Chicago. I think he's a true playmaker. I think when we look at historically guys like, and I'm not going to directly compare him, but a guy like Alvin Kamara, who can run the ball and catch the ball and have a lot of flair, that's what DeAndre Swift is, in my opinion. I think he's a much better runner of the football than credited. If you look at the last few seasons, Philadelphia, and then the last 2 in Detroit, you can find a handful of games over 120 rushing yards. He's had a 62 reception season. Like that says something in itself. So Chicago's been a lot of fun right now. Just obviously the news about Keenan Allen yesterday, still have draft capital. The quarterback position, that's a big question mark, but that's a debate and a discussion for another time. But I think Chicago is doing a great job building their offense. And I love this move for DeAndre Swift. And I love the fact that he gets to go, hopefully, punch the Lions in the mouth twice a year moving forward.
Yeah, DeAndre Swift, I was a huge believer when he was on the Lions. I played in a home league auction draft, and he was my guy in 2022. Luckily, I had Jamal Williams on that same team, but Jamal Williams, 43% of his fantasy points in 2022 were from rushing touchdowns. He had 5 games with multiple rushing touchdowns in them. but DeAndre Swift still scored more points per game than Jamal Williams that year. A lot of people don't know that. They were neck and neck. Granted, Swift was hurt, but he is such a dynamic player. We saw what Jamal Williams did last year on, a much different New Orleans Saints team. His only rushing touchdown of the year was in the final game of the season. Granted, it may have been the straw that broke the camel's back that got Arthur Smith fired because it got him really upset. But DeAndre Swift is a great dynamic back. If the Bears truly believed in the running backs they had on their staff last year to ride into this year with, I believe, Caleb Williams coming in, then they would have been okay with Khalil Herbert, Roschon Johnson, maybe bringing back Dante Foreman. No, DeAndre Swift, with cash on hand the Bears had, is such a good ad for this team. I don't think he's going to be a very popular ad. I don't even know if he's going to be a top 12 guy, but definitely a good spot for real football. And I do still think he's going to yield a ton of fantasy points in 2024. Let's move on to the next award here. And we have the most likely to succeed in 2024 as a result of free agency. Now, this doesn't have to be a player that signed a new free agency deal. It could be someone residually, that benefits from some of the moves that were made. Who do you want to start with here?
So I want to preface that by saying I'm not saying that this player is going to have a huge season. I'm not even 100% sure he is the guy moving forward. I just think that it fit the category of, hey, free agency is setting up this guy to be successful. That's how I'm approaching this one. So I want to mention Will Levis, and I'm not even a big Will Levis fan, but free agency, in my opinion, has done him good.
Couldn't have gone better for him. Yeah,
exactly. You've had DeAndre Hopkins was a good veteran to have on the roster. We have a short window with Will Levis, so he had the opening game where we all rose our eyebrows. We're like, man, this guy looked really good. And then he really didn't look that great the rest of the games he played last year. But it was interesting. I tweeted it out, but DeAndre Hopkins and Calvin Ridley, who they added, had a very, very similar stat line this past season. Targets, 136 to D-Hop, 136 to Ridley. Receptions, 75 D-Hop, 76 Ridley. Receiving yards, 1057, 1016 D-Hop over Ridley there. Touchdowns, 7 and 8. Ridley had the edge there. And then D-Hop, 13.2 fantasy points per game. Ridley, 13.5 points per game. So they literally looked across the league and said, who is the most similar veteran to the veteran we already have? And they picked out Calvin Ridley. So you have two reliable targets now in DeAndre Hopkins and Calvin Ridley. Does Treylon Burks, can they Arkansas it up and he has these crafty plays set up for him? I don't know, maybe. Another thing too, you had Tony Pollard, which I thought was strange in all honesty, to Tyjae Spears because they both are pass catching running backs.
Mm-hmm.
Pollard 55 receptions this past season, ranked 8th. Spears 52, ranked 9th. So they're literally back to back on the stat sheet. But now you got two veteran guys that have a history of getting open, producing receiving yards, high target volume, and now you got two guys in the backfield that can make plays. I think both Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears can not only just be dump off guys, but also just guys that make plays out of the backfield in the passing game. So Chigakonkwo also as well can complement. I just think if a guy was set up to hopefully have a good year, Will Levis was that. So we'll see. I think it's very telling. I think his entire dynasty valuation is going to come down to what he does this coming season because he doesn't have a 5-year window to utilize DeAndre Hopkins and Calvin Ridley. He literally has a 1 or 2 year window to do that. I didn't even look at the contracts, but never thought I'd talk about Will Levis, but free agency did him okay.
Yeah, I actually tried to get him cheap in a couple dynasty leagues I'm in, and I think everyone kind of was waiting to see because he was drafted very high in the second round last year. So, the Tennessee Titans are moving forward with Will Levis. That is not, a secret to anyone. So I think a lot of people wanted to see how free agency shook out, and it worked out great in his favor. These are not your father's run first Tennessee Titans. Bringing in Brian Callahan as their head coach is a massive move. And I have a head coach coaching moves article up on Fantrax now if you want to take a look at that. But Brian Callahan, formerly of the Cincinnati Bengals, who had Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, knows how to run a passing offense, or a pass-first offense, I should say. They finished top 7 in pass attempts per season, 3 of the last 5 years, including each of the last 2. And Joe Burrow didn't even play a majority of last season. So it just goes to show you that he can work with anybody. And I think bringing Calvin Ridley, keeping DeAndre Hopkins is great for this team. And the offensive coordinator they brought in, Nick Holtz, the passing game coordinator for the Jacksonville Jaguars last year. And the Jacksonville Jaguars last year passed more than the Cincinnati Bengals did. So I just think this is going to be a very, very pass-first offense. You mentioned Tony Pollard, Tajay Spears, pass-catching running backs. Now they have Ridley, Hopkins, Treylon Burks, Chigakonkwo. I think Will Levis, if not for anything else, could have like a Sam Howell type season where he throws a ton of pass attempts, maybe throws a ton of picks in the process. But if your league plays -1 for an interception, who cares? We want to see him get chunk yards, score a ton of touchdowns, and that's really all we want. And you're going to be able to get Will Levis for dirt cheap, especially in Superflex leagues, in my opinion. The player I most have to succeed in 2024 wasn't someone residually, but I couldn't help but put this player on here last night when the trade or the signing went down. Marquise Brown. He's joining the Kansas City Chiefs, the back-to-back Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs, who are in pursuit of a three-peat. And Marquise Brown is a guy that can get them there. He replaces Marquez Valdes-Scantling as Mahomes' deep threat, and Mahomes desperately needs a deep threat. Marquez Valdes-Scantling had a ton of drops last year, left a ton of meat on the bone, and Marquise Brown is a much, much better player than Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Back in 2019 at his pro day, Marquise Brown ran a 4.27 40. He's only going to be 27 years old at the start of the season, blazing speed. On his resume with the Baltimore Ravens, who we know to be a run-first team, he has a 91 reception, 1,008 yards, and 6 touchdown line in 2021. So he can be a wide receiver 1 if need be. Now, they have Rashee Rice there. They have Travis Kelce there. But there's still a ton of targets there for a guy like Marquise Brown. Mahomes spread the ball around a ton last year. So I think he's going to narrow down his options in the passing game, focus on those big 3. And I think Marquise Brown is in for a big 2024 season. Last thing I want to talk about here with that deep threat. Over the last 2 seasons, Patrick Mahomes has only thrown 2 touchdowns that traveled more than 20 yards in the air. That is absolutely ridiculous when you consider he has an MVP from 2 seasons ago and has also won 2 Super Bowls. That is just ridiculous. Last year, his average depth of target per touchdown was just 3.9 yards. Go back to 2019, it was 17.3 yards. Obviously, eliminating Tyreek Hill from this offense the last 2 seasons dropped that number quite a bit. Bringing back Marquise Brown will increase that number. So while Marquise Brown is set to succeed in 2024, I think Patrick Mahomes also stays inside the top 3 for my quarterback rankings as well. Even though he's not the most mobile, he can still scoot as well. But I think his passing game options also improved this offseason with the addition of Marquise Brown.
I agree. I bumped him up. It wasn't significant, but 1 spot in my dynasty rankings. Patrick Mahomes, I don't have him as my 1, but I also want to note, you mentioned Rashee Rice. I think the instant reaction for some people might be, hey, this might hurt him. I think this is actually something that complements him because, like you said, with the deep numbers, that's what Marquise Brown can do. He can extend the field. He can make the deep plays. And Rashee Rice this past season only had 5 deep targets. So that meant via player profiler, 102 other wide receivers had more deep targets than Rashee Rice. His average depth of target, 4.8. That ranked number 99. So you got a guy that's more of an underneath guy now being complemented by Marquise Brown, who's more of a field extender. You know, if it was 2 field extenders or 2 guys that are more of short target guys, maybe then, you know, it hurts one another. But I think I like to see these moves sometimes where you have 2 guys that are good at what they do and complement each other. So before you start freaking out thinking, this is not good for Rashee Rice, I think it's completely fine at the end of the day. And Marquise Brown back in 2022, you know, this
Nick, we lost your audio there for a second, buddy. I don't know if your mic went out.
All right. Got me back?
Yeah, I got you back.
All right, cool. So trying to get back on track here. So last season, obviously Kyler Murray, got my mic back there too. Perfect. All right. So last season, Kyler Murray obviously missed a good chunk of time.
Also, when we look at Marquise Brown, he's missed some time. I like to look back at 2022, the opening 6 weeks, and it's a small window, but it was in my opinion, the last time both he was very healthy or completely healthy, and Kyler Murray was completely healthy. And during that time in 2022, weeks 1 through 6, he ranked wide receiver 5 in total fantasy points. He was number 4, and this is for the position, in targets, number 5 in receptions, number 7 in receiving yards. He scored 3 touchdowns. So during that span of 6 weeks with Kyler Murray, Marquise Brown was very, very good. So I think that, we look at the last 2 seasons, 14 games, 12 games played, not super, super fantasy productive, and we think he's not very good. He actually is. He just needs to stay healthy, and he needs a quarterback to be healthy. And I think that's exactly what is going to happen in 2024 with Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. He's had, for all intents and purposes here, Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, and Patrick Mahomes as his quarterbacks on 3 different teams. Not many wide receivers can say they've had such good of a stretch of quarterback luck in the NFL. Let's move on to our next award here for Free Agency Fantasy Football Awards, and that is the most likely to be a 2024 first-round redraft pick that maybe wasn't before free agency started. And I'll start off here real quick. I think the obvious answer for me, and this is a guy I wanted to talk about, we already talked about him already, is Derrick Henry. Leaving Tennessee, with 2,300 plus touches, not really certain what kind of scheme he's going to fit into. Is he going to share a backfield with someone? Is he going to go somewhere that's maybe more pass heavy and he's just going to be a touchdown dependent guy? Derrick Henry could have ended up somewhere that maybe didn't help his fantasy value too much, and he was kind of going to finish his career somewhere, maybe a 2nd round, 3rd round fantasy draft pick. I think Baltimore is a great spot for him to be now vaulted back into the 1st round. Maybe not the top 6 picks if you're in a 12-team league, but back half of the 1st round. If you grab Derrick Henry and a wide receiver, I think that's a great start to your league there. This was a horrible offensive line, deterred me from Derrick Henry in 2023 in Tennessee. He now goes to Baltimore, much improved offensive line. He still managed the 2nd highest rush yards in the league last year behind that offensive line in Tennessee. Per Next Gen Stats, Derrick Henry hit 21.68 miles per hour on a run in his final regular season game last year. So for all the folks that say, yeah, Derrick Henry's fallen off a cliff, he's washed, he's getting old, too many touches, he's still got it. Some guys are just built differently. And, if anyone in the NFL is built differently, it's Derrick Henry. At least 44% of last year's carries are available in Baltimore. That's, notably with Gus Edwards' exit, he leaves behind 198. Obviously, he had a ton of touchdowns last year. 82 rushing touchdowns in the last 6 seasons for Derrick Henry. That's 13 per, including 12 last year in Tennessee. The Baltimore Ravens, and you and I went back and forth on Twitter on this, Baltimore Ravens scored 26 rushing touchdowns last year, 2nd behind 3 teams that scored 27 as the league's most. Gus Edwards, who's now gone, Keaton Mitchell, who's going to be recovering from a late season ACL, full knee tear, Melvin Gordon, who's obviously not there, and J.K. Dobbins, who's probably not coming back, but recovering from Achilles. Those 4 players scored 18 of 26 touchdowns last year. It's very conceivable to think that Derrick Henry takes all of those touchdowns from all 4 of those players and scores 18 by himself, if not more. So Derrick Henry, yeah, maybe he is a little bit touchdown dependent to be a top back, but I don't think he needs to score a ton of touchdowns to be fantasy relevant in Baltimore, but he's going to. It's possible that we could see Derrick Henry with the amount of work and, tread on his tires still, that he could finish inside the top 5 running backs. That's his ceiling. And I think he should be drafted as such.
Derrick Henry kind of reminds me of, and a lot of people are not going to like to hear this because they don't like this guy. But he almost reminds me of like a LeBron James, because you got these guys that are older veterans that continue to perform. But when you look at their literal physical build, that it makes sense for their longevity to be that. It's because these guys completely take care of their bodies. They are built like tanks, and they, in the offseason consistently are getting after, maintaining and building, and that adds to injury prevention. And that's exactly what we see out of Derrick Henry and LeBron James. You got 2 guys that are literally, not just like the metaphorical phrase of it, but they are built different and they build themselves. And Derrick Henry, we already saw in the offseason, I'm sure you caught it. He's in the gym, he's doing all these strength exercises. He's doing these mobility exercises. He's a guy that probably is going to just run off into the sunset one day, still producing, just because he is physically built different. So I don't like, I don't look at the age factor, especially with redraft, thinking, hey, wear and tear, he's probably going to decline. I just look at a guy that is literally built different.
Yeah, Derrick Henry goes to a gym in Texas, and I follow that gym and the trainers there on Instagram just to see what he's up to, honestly, because it's fun to watch. He actually posted during COVID 2020, on the notes on his iPhone, he screenshotted it and said, "Here's my workout for the day." And I said, "You know what? I'm going to go give that a try." I was gassed. I struggled so bad, and I work out, periodically a couple times a week. Derrick Henry is doing different things in the gym that no person really should be doing just as a casual workout. And he's still doing them. So Derrick Henry, big 2024. Who do you got?
We talked about him a lot already, but Saquon Barkley, I think 100% should be in the first round of drafts. I as of today, I can see me ranking him exactly where I did last year, but trying to be right this time is the running back too. I really can see him being that. I think Christian McCaffrey, nothing indicates that he's slowing down right now, and I think he's just so far ahead as a complete running back than any other player in the NFL. So I think that he should be the running back one for redraft. I think after that, you can debate Breece Hall. You can debate a Bijan Robinson. We talked about Derrick Henry. You go down the list. Even Jonathan Taylor's a guy I'm going to like a lot more than consensus next year. But Saquon Barkley in the Eagles offense, like I can't picture, to the combination of just like immense talent, dual threat running back in a better situation than anybody else outside of Christian McCaffrey. Right. And I think it was Brian Drake, who's with Fantasy Points, mentioned something that I thought was super, super smart. Mentioned how the NFL took notice of investing in Christian McCaffrey. What did that end up, doing for the 49ers? They went to the Super Bowl, and he was a massive, massive reason why they were so successful this past year. I think Christian McCaffrey could have been the NFL's MVP. And I think the Philadelphia Eagles looked at that and said, hey, we're up there. We're one of the better offenses in the NFL. Look at what the 49ers did. They took one of the best talents in the league and they invested in him, even though he's not a young running back. And it worked out very well for them. And I think the same thing can happen for the Eagles. They invest in a very, very talented running back who has the same sort of skill set as Christian McCaffrey, and hopefully it leads them to a Super Bowl. And I think when those things happen, it can translate so good for fantasy football.
Yeah, Christian McCaffrey too. A lot of people were fading in fantasy football because he was injury prone. He was getting a ton of volume on the Carolina Panthers. He still goes to 49ers and had a ton of volume, but it was more efficient volume, smart offense. And I think that's what you're going to see with Saquon in Philadelphia as well. Running out of time here a little bit, so we'll quickly move through our last couple of awards here. Why don't I jump into the biggest riser for dynasty or redraft purposes, and you can grab a faller here. And the biggest riser I have for dynasty purposes specifically is Trey McBride, tight end, Arizona Cardinals. I think a lot of people are going to be high on Trey McBride. I think he already had increased his value, obviously, from last year. But when you consider where you could draft him in redraft too, and you consider these tight end rankings for dynasty, Sam Laporte is at a lot of people's top tier. Brock Bowers is entering the league. You still have guys like Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews that are interesting there as well. And Trey McBride's right in the mix there. But I think overall, he's worth the investment. The vacant 2023 targets as of now in Arizona is 38% from just Hollywood Brown, who we talked about earlier, Rondale Moore, who was traded to Atlanta, and Zach Ertz, who played the same position as Trey McBride, obviously last year. Those three exiting Arizona leaves behind 38% of the targets. So Trey McBride slides in. He actually led the team last year with 106 targets, followed by Hollywood Brown and Rondale Moore. Again, both of those guys gone. Now, I do expect them to add Marvin Harrison Jr., who's going to get his fair share of targets as well from Kyler Murray, but Trey McBride averaged 8.5 targets per game upon Ertz's departure last season. That would have tied with TJ Hawkinson for the most per game last year in 2023. He was 6th in total targets amongst tight ends, but after Ertz left, he was 3rd in total targets amongst tight ends. He's 6'4", 246 pounds. That is the perfect build for a tight end. He ran a 4.53 at his pro day for the 40-yard dash a couple years ago. The guy is a very good athlete. I just think everything is lining up for Trey McBride to continue to succeed in fantasy football for years to come. If you really, really need a tight end, you feel you're a tight end away, perhaps go try to buy Trey McBride. You don't have to try to buy low on every acquisition for fantasy football, especially in Dynasty. Some guys are just worth the price, and Trey McBride is a guy I think that is.
Absolutely. I mean, I have Trey McBride as my tight end too in Dynasty. I've been very, very high on him. I have the receipts. I think people that follow me know that I've been high on McBride since he was a prospect. Like if you go into Google his prospect numbers, he was well ahead of many, many very good wide receivers just in plain statistics. And that translates into the NFL as a guy that can handle volume and have like a ton of receiving yard upside and fantasy upside in general. Love Trey McBride. So I do like that call. My tight end too in Dynasty.
Yeah. All right. How about a faller? I guess we're sticking with the same position here. Who do you have as the biggest faller from free agency?
Yeah, so I again don't want to just be a Bears guy talking Bears players, but I do think that the recent moves have greatly impacted him. But it's Cole Kmet. I think Cole Kmet's been very relevant because he's been the number 2 guy in Chicago in terms of targets. I think it's been even this past season. You look at the offense and what was it? It was DJ Moore and Cole Kmet. 2 out of 3 of his last seasons, he's had 90 plus targets, and now you have a couple of things that happen. Now you have a target monster in Keenan Allen coming in. And we're hoping for a fully healthy season, but he is going to command heavy targets. And so is DJ Moore because both of them are elite at earning targets and providing a lot to the offense. And also, I'm not going to get crazy here, but Gerald Everett's a good tight end. I'm not going to say he's even like a great tight end. He's a good tight end, and he's been a starter in the league for years. He's a guy that also brings some receiving yard upside. And, he's had splash games with the Chargers. He's had splash games historically, but I do think that he's not just going to watch Cole Kmet play. I think he is going to cut into the role. I do think it's still Cole Kmet's job, but I think Gerald Everett's good enough to have some sort of impact. Robert Tonyan was not good enough. Robert Tonyan was actually poor with what he was given this past season. He failed to make plays that were very routine. Gerald Everett's not that guy. So Keenan Allen edition, on top of DJ Moore, on top of Gerald Everett, what made Cole Kmet relevant? Targets. And now I fear that the target consistency, which is what I look for in a tight end and what makes Trey McBride, who you just talked about, very fantasy appealing, is not going to be there for Cole Kmet. Not completely fading, but he was once a top 12 guy for me in Dynasty, and I have him well outside of that, maybe 15 to 17 or something along those lines.
Yeah, he was a favorite for Justin Fields, who we don't expect to be with the Chicago Bears in 2024. And a lot of people say tight end is a rookie quarterback's best friend, little safety valve there. Well, you don't really need a tight end safety valve when you have Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, and a couple other guys, DeAndre Swift on that offense. So Caleb Williams has plenty of other options in the passing game. Nick, let's wrap up here. There's plenty of guys to talk about. You and I have been doing content all week on Fantrax. You can check out Nick at P2W Fantasy on Twitter, at Colin_McT, myself on Twitter, as well as our stuff on FantraxHQ.com. So we can go a little bit more in depth with these guys. But let's just do a rapid fire winners and losers. I'm just going to name a player. We'll go back and forth here. You tell me in like 10 seconds or less, winner or loser for fantasy football. You ready?
Got it.
All right. Let's go Devin Singletary signing with the New York Giants.
Winner because I think it guarantees him some touches. They're probably going to add a rookie running back, but I do think that it guarantees him some touches and probably a struggling offense.
Okay. Tony Pollard, who you mentioned earlier, signing with the Tennessee Titans alongside Tajay Spears.
Loser because Tajay Spears played over 50% of the snaps with Derrick Henry, and he also is a pass-catching back. So now you have 2 pass-catching backs that are going to take away from each other. So loser.
Okay, I'll grab the next one here. I have Aaron Jones. I actually have him as a winner for fantasy football. I do think with a rookie quarterback expected under center in Minnesota, Aaron Jones is going to have a big role. Maybe not a massive role, 300 touches per se, but good pass catching back. Can handle 20 carries per game at any given time. I think he's going to score a ton in this offense. Zach Moss, who do you got? What do you got there?
I'd say winner. It's probably him and Chase Brown. I think Chase Brown's also low-key a winner because Zach Moss is not Joe Mixon. I think both guys will have the opportunity to touch the football, and that translates for fantasy football in general. So,
yeah. Antonio Gibson's next. He's signing with the New England Patriots. Nobody's really talking about this move, and nor should they. With a rebuilding roster there and sharing the backfield with Ramondre Stevenson, it's easy to say Antonio Gibson is a loser in free agency, although I do think he can have a flex appeal, PPR upside role there, with Alex Van Pelt as the offensive coordinator, formerly with the Cleveland Browns. Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, could be the Kareem Hunt role there in New England.
Before you move on, before you move on, what is Ramondre Stevenson because of Antonio Gibson? Do you feel like he's a winner or loser? Because this is one I've been really going back and forth on.
Yeah. My gut says loser, but at the same time, maybe he's just better priced accordingly in 2024. Last year, he was kind of like a third-round pick for me, and obviously was not a third-round pick for me.
All right.
Yeah.
I was curious.
Gabe Davis going to Jacksonville. What do you got there?
I'm indifferent. I don't want Gabe Davis in fantasy football. I don't think he's very good. I think Josh Allen is a much better quarterback than Trevor Lawrence. I think the opportunity I don't see it as any better. I think Zay Jones is just as good of a football player as Gabe Davis is. And maybe money talks at the end of the day. And I'd love to hear your opinion on this because I do feel like a lot of people are very in on this move. But I think when you have the opportunity for targets from Josh Allen and you have like some good games and mostly bad games, I'm just completely checked out.
Yeah, I feel like for years now we've been holding on to the fact that he scored 4 touchdowns in that playoff game against the Chiefs, and he's only 23. He's only 24. Now he's only 25. Gabe Davis is going to be competing with Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, Evan Ingram, who led the team in targets last year. A very good running game. So I don't think his role really improves down in Jacksonville. If anything, it gets worse. I actually think this is great news for Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk. I'm going to be buying a lot of them in 2024. Curtis Samuel, Buffalo Bills. I have as a winner, actually, replacing Gabe Davis. I think it's a winner for the Buffalo Bills, too. They got a cheaper Gabe Davis, and I think he's actually better than Gabe Davis. He reunites with his former offensive coordinator, Joe Brady, from their time in Carolina, where he did have in 2020 41 rush attempts. We could see him as a dynamic weapon there in the Bills offense, and he's going to be cheap. Darnell Mooney, former Bears, one of your team there. How do you feel about him going to Atlanta?
At first, I thought it was a cool move because he's had history of some receiving yard upside and Kirk Cousins, that attachment. But the more I thought about it, I'm going to say best ball, maybe. I'm going to say loser because I don't know what sort of targets he's going to get with Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and with Bijan Robinson catching some passes out of the backfield. I know KJ Osborne had some relevance at times with Kirk Cousins, so maybe I'm kind of in the middle. I don't want to cop out of this one. Sometimes I struggle, like if you're maybe getting 5 targets, maybe getting 2, what that means for fantasy football. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, I still think, this is a nice little move. They traded for Rondell Moore as well. Those guys are great pieces for this Atlanta Falcons offense. But again, when Kirk Cousins was in Minnesota, it was Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson. You got the running backs as well. KJ Osborne was a nice flex appeal here and there. Great best ball guy. So I think Darnell Mooney fits that mold as well. Yeah. Last 2 here, and I think I know the answer to this one. I'm going to go with Mike Evans. He is a winner, reuniting with Baker Mayfield, staying in Tampa Bay. 10 straight 1,000-yard seasons, wide receiver 8 last year. That is his ceiling. Won't be priced as a top 8 guy, in my opinion, given the emergence of guys like Puka Nacua. Got Marvin Harrison joining the mix, a lot of hot rookies. I think Mike Evans, again, can be had somewhat cheaper than he should be and can push for another 1,000 yards there in Tampa Bay. Last but not least, Michael Pittman Jr., I'll kick it over to you. Winner or loser?
I think winner. I think he's had a very, very substantial role with the Colts. I think he makes a big 3 there. The base of their offense, it's Anthony Richardson, it's Jonathan Taylor, and it's Michael Pittman Jr. And I think that we saw in a small window, Anthony Richardson actually flash as a passer. We did. So I think that was encouraging. And I think this Colts offense is getting better and better. And to go back real quick on the Bucs, Baker Mayfield's back. Excellent for Mike Evans.
Yeah.
Go look at the playoff statistics. It's only 2 games, but there's a guy that stands out to me in those 2 games, the 2 most important games of the season, and that's Cade Otton with Baker Mayfield. So I think he's a true sleeper heading into the next season.
Good little plug there to end our episode here on Fantrax Football Friday. Nick, thank you for joining me. I know you've been busy this week with the graphics for Fantrax here. Tell everyone where else they can find your work.
Sure. 99% of my work is going to be on, X or Twitter at P2W Fantasy. I'm on Instagram as well. I am on TikTok. That's where I make a lot of the videos that I push everywhere. I'm doing a ton of content in various forms. So short videos, long videos, data drops, write-ups, whatever you can think of, I'm trying to do. So catch me on wherever you consume content, and I'm probably doing stuff there.
Yeah, I'm sure we could have talked far longer than the hour that we already did, but that's what our content is for there. So go be sure to check out Nick's Skrip stuff on all of his social media platforms, on the Fantrax platform. I myself have done a ton of written work this week for all these free agents at Colin_McT. You can find it all there in my pinned tweet. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on Fantrax Football Friday for the Free Agency Fantasy Awards. So many more moves to be made. At the top of the show, we didn't even talk about it. Aaron Donald retired. There's just so much going on in the NFL right now. There really is no off season. So be sure to stick with us every week here on the social media on Fridays with doing episodes. And we'll catch you guys next week. Have a good weekend.